Welcome back, everybody. It has been a long wait, and hopefully, that's the longest hiatus that you'll ever have to endure. I did not mean to put you through that. But I'm back with a pretty juicy question here to answer. This was posed to me by somebody who had only recently taken their dive into the gaming pool. They were relatively new to gaming, and they got their own Nintendo Switch, and they were busy and occupied playing Breath of the Wild and exploring the vast lands of Hyrule. And for anyone who's played that game, you know how you can get sucked into it so easily and just have a great time there. Well, they asked me after enjoying some hours in that game, what makes a game good? And I thought about that question for a little while, and I was brainstorming and starting to work on this script. But then at some point during the writing of this script, the most simple, concise answer popped into my mind. What makes a game good? Play a lot of different games and find out. Seriously, I'm being sincere there. If you are new to gaming and you're not sure what games are good, obviously you can follow the charts and you can look at different articles and websites. Everyone's got something sorted by ratings, so you can just click on that. But you're not going to know for yourself what makes a game good until you start playing a lot of different types of games, a lot of different genres. And then you'll come up with your own tastes and you'll know what games are good for yourself. But obviously, the video is not over yet. There's a lot more that we can explore here. We can have a lot of fun with this topic. And so that's what I want to do today. I want to have some fun with it. So I suspect most of you watching are lifelong gamers. Like me, you've played dozens, hundreds of games, whatever it may be. You've got decades of gaming experience, and with that experience comes knowledge. You know which franchises are doing well, which franchises have gone downhill. You know for yourself which games throughout time are critically acclaimed and praised as being the best, and you also know which games are infamous for being bad. And as I said earlier, we have our own individual tastes. Different people like different genres, different people like different games. Obviously, there is a lot of overlap for what makes a game good and what the best games are. I can't deny that. There is some objectivity to this. And I'm going to try to explore a little bit of that, but this isn't intended to be a video essay. This isn't intended to be the most critical analysis of the best games of all time. This is, again, meant to be kind of lighthearted and just have fun with you, the audience, and interact a little bit in the comments, okay? This is all, obviously, I don't know why it needs to be stated, but it does, so I don't get lambasted later. These are my subjective opinions as I try to figure out a little bit of objectivity. That's it. So, again, what makes a game good? Well, growing up, most companies, websites, gaming magazines, all of those different media avenues, there was a more streamlined, standardized way to answer that question. And gaming reviews typically included these 5 criteria. You had your graphics, visuals, whatever, sound, story, gameplay, and a bit of a funny one, there was replayability. And some of those had interchangeable names like sound and music, audio, visual, whatever, right? Basically, though, those 5 criteria I do think were standard, and they would typically be given something out of 5 stars, and then at the end of the review, it would all get added up together, averaged out, and bam, that's your rating for a game. Sometimes they were weighted a little bit heavier, like gameplay obviously could be weighted more than replayability. That was more important. So maybe gameplay got a nice big chunk of like 10 stars or something. Replayability might just be 3 stars. But time and time again, you would run across those 5 categories. I decided to look at some recent game reviews for this video, and it was pretty interesting what I saw. Different websites, didn't matter. People have really abandoned the old way of critiquing games. That old 5 criteria standard, it's gone. Now journalists are writing these long, lengthy, kind of free-flowing, unstructured reviews. And I suppose that's fine. They're not as interesting to me because they're a little more anecdotal oftentimes. But I suppose it's fine because games have gotten more complex. Think about it. There are so many genres nowadays that are just getting blended into these new games. And those really didn't exist in the 90s and the early 2000s. And it's normal. As time progresses, technology evolves, and people get a little more creative. They have to try something new. That's why you have a game like Fortnite, where in a third-person shooter, there's these building and crafting mechanics. It's crazy. Things like that just couldn't exist with old technology. So I suppose the reviews have changed to adopt at the times. And it's not just the genres that have changed either. I mean, graphics. How are you supposed to review graphics now? You can say that, yeah, the game looks great, but as a whole, graphics have just progressed so much now that what really matters in a game isn't so much the graphical fidelity and how sharp the lines are, because lots of companies can do that. Any AAA company should be able to do that. And I'm grinning because I'm thinking of poor Nintendo just kind of left behind a little bit. They're like 5 years in the past, but we're not going to rag on Nintendo in this video. I don't want to drag anybody down here. But graphics as a whole have gotten to the point where to stand out with your graphics, it's more about having a unique art style than it is having good graphics. Now, in this video, I want to remember the past. I want to go back to that old standard of, critiquing games and look at the sound, the graphics, and all of that stuff. I'm going to look at all of it, the old standard criteria, but I'm going to save the best for last. I'm going to save the gameplay for last, because really, I think that when you talk about what makes a game good, it's always going to come back to the gameplay. But in this video, in part 1, we're going to look at the other aspects and see how much they matter and what games have really exemplified good graphics or good sound, whatever. I thought up an assortment of games that kind of represent a little bit of my gaming history. Obviously, not entirely, and only a chunk of it. But I thought it'd be fun to share those with you guys. And please, in the comments, I want to hear about your favorite games. It's one of the most fun things to talk about, just everyone's favorite games. And by no means is my list here exhaustive. I'm only giving a few examples for each section that I talk about. So go ahead and contribute your own. Graphics and visuals. So, as I said before, good graphics nowadays, they do not leave a lot to be desired. But back in the day, I'm going to age myself a little bit. No, not that much. Back in the day, my friends and I could tell which games had better graphics, which ones were coming up, and they were going to blow the old games out of the water. One that stood out for me was thinking back to high school. My friends were getting so hyped about the trailers for Twilight Princess, and it was obvious that the graphics had improved compared to games like Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. And people really skipped Wind Waker, unfortunately. But anyways, the improvements were so obvious. And graphics really were a major selling point back then. Yes, graphics are still a selling point today. But back then, man, wars were fought about graphics. I mean, the emergence of PC Master Race basically came out of graphics. And PlayStation versus Xbox was always about graphics. And Xbox sometimes took the cake for PlayStation's having no games, but whatever. That's another side of history that we're not getting into today. Every new generation of consoles was expected to bring better graphics with it, with the better hardware and the higher price point. And think about it. I mean, you were saving up to get the next PlayStation, the PlayStation 3. If you were coming off the PlayStation 2, why would you want to spend more money on a new console that wasn't going to make your games look better? And as more trailers came out and, E3 and different conventions were showcasing new games, it was obvious that, there were a lot of ways that these games could improve. So every generation of consoles promised an evolution of graphics, and for the most part, every generation delivered on just that. But where do we stand now? We're seeing companies, both small and large, creating games with breathtaking, realistic visuals in high graphical fidelity. Like I said, good graphics, they aren't that hard to find anymore. Indie developers have turned old school pixel art into artistic masterpieces thanks to modern technology. So where do companies look to improve when the graphics can't really get much better? Amazing graphics were never something that I particularly cared about. The overall look of the game, which has more to do with the art style and color palette, was far more important to me, and still is more important for me, really. If the game offers a world that I want to be in, with detailed environments compelling me to explore, then I'm satisfied. If it's meant to be bright, cartoony, and colorful, then I can enjoy a game with bright, cartoony, and colorful graphics, provided it's good. If it's meant to be dark, convey serious tones, and invoke a sense of realism, then I can enjoy that too, again, provided the game is good. Clearly, it's not the graphics themselves that make a game good, but graphics obviously go a long way to enriching your experience, to making you feel like you're a part of the world, and they can affect how you feel during your adventure. We've seen companies deviate from the norm, like I said earlier, with games like The Wind Waker and Okami. But these games are still talked about not just for how they broke graphical conventions and the standard art styles at the time. They are genuinely good games, and they have fan bases around them that love the gameplay. If you want to try more good games with unique graphics, whether that's the opinion upheld today or that's just what was thought of at the time of their release, then look no further than Paper Mario. This cute, charming, funny game kind of blew Mario fans away with the graphical style. And for a long time, I actually resented it, and I didn't want to play it. I thought they were taking too many changes with the game, and lo and behold, it became one of my favorite games ever. Great RPG with great characters, surprisingly funny, and it's got surprisingly deep gameplay. And the best part about it, just like the Mario platformers, tons of secrets hidden in plain sight. Highly recommend you play this. How about Subnautica if you want to explore a world underwater? This game is entrancing. The variety of mysterious alien sea creatures and searching for sunken treasures made me lose track of time when I played it. I was hooked for days. Finally, how about Antichamber for a mind-bending puzzle game? Trippy might be the only word needed to describe this. I've yet to play another game like it, and I've recommended it to so many people in my personal life. But I will warn you, you will feel a bit crazy at times when you play it, but stick with it. The puzzles, as difficult as they could be at times, it's so worth it when you can finally beat them all. To close this section on graphics, I just want to ask you, the viewers, what were your favorite worlds to explore? And specifically because of the graphics. So think about creativity and imagination and what went into designing those worlds. Which ones blew you away because maybe they harkened back to some kind of childhood imaginations of your own? Or which ones were the most immersive? Which ones were so vast, like in an MMORPG, that you couldn't believe as you were exploring these massive lands? Maybe a little bit of interactivity with the environment is what really compelled you to keep on playing. So I want to know. Let me know about your favorites in the comments. Sound and music. I feel like sound design and music are only things that we appreciate in good games. Think about this. In a bad game, you're not going to remember how realistic it sounds when you bring a metal sword down on a wooden shield. Nobody cares about that. Nobody remembers it. And I would never tell a friend, hey, you should play this game because the music is so great. Oh, by the way, the gameplay sucks. No, you're not going to make a recommendation like that. The Witcher 3, amazing game. If it wasn't, I wouldn't be able to park Geralt in a lush field and listen to the grass blowing in the wind. I would just have no patience for that. I would want the game to be over already. What about Ocarina of Time? Iconic game. And you know what else is iconic there? The sound of Link wearing his iron boots and stomping around. Dunk, 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 dunk. And of course, when that reappears in subsequent Zelda games, it's nostalgic and you love it when you hear the iron boots in other games. And the music in those games, equally phenomenal. And the importance of music cannot be overstated. I'm not going to go into a big musical analysis here, but just know that I do really appreciate good music and good games. And boy, does it stick with you. I can still remember back to 2 decades ago when I'm sat down in front of the TV and Super Mario Bros. 3 is playing, and it's just the World 1 screen, it's just the overworld, but that music is playing, and the doodads that are in the background are keeping time with the song. I love that, and I'll never forget it. It's music that makes exploring a dark cave scary, and it's music that makes escaping from enemies feel tense. It's music that indicates a moment of respite when you finally get to breathe and relax in the game. It's music that makes your adventure feel merry and makes everyone feel happy when you're playing the game. It sets the entire mood for a scene. It enhances the feeling of the adventure that you're on, and when you hear that music again later, it's what makes you remember that game so fondly. Obviously, you'll have to just play a lot of different games and enjoy the games and their music for yourself, or you can go listen to some soundtracks on YouTube. Some good games with great music that I've enjoyed, well, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, Majora's Mask, Age of Empires 2 is one of my favorites. I can just put it on in the background and I can get so much work done with that one. and some individual songs that deserve mention. How about Terra's theme from Final Fantasy VI? And there's also, I think it's called Crossing Those Hills from Final Fantasy IX. That title's got a couple of different names that you could look up on YouTube. I could obviously go on with so many more examples of music, but I'll leave it there. You can share your own in the comments, and we'll move on to the next section now. Story. This topic deserves a video all on its own, but I'll try to keep it brief here, keep it condensed for you guys. I have never been sold on a game because it had a good story, and likewise, I have never recommended a game to somebody because of its story until I played the Witcher trilogy. Now that game, the gameplay throughout all 3 games is there, solid. But it was the first time I'd ever played a game, and I thought, if people want to experience a good, rich story in a game, they should try The Witcher. If you could put up with 3 games, it's well worth it, I promise you. I realize that I'm especially judgmental and critical when it comes to storytelling and writing. But that's more so true in TV and movies, because those 2 mediums specifically are, I think, meant to deliver on that aspect. A video game, on the other hand, come on, give me the gameplay first and make other parts of the game interesting. A game can survive without a good story, but if it's not fun to play, then what good is it? And I also think that video games and the developers have a much more difficult challenge. Take, for example, JRPGs. How are you supposed to deliver a good story in something like a 40-hour game? How are you supposed to pace that accordingly and keep your player invested in what's going on in the background? It's a tall challenge. It's not impossible, but it's definitely challenging. I don't think many games do a good job of delivering on story, but really, if there's just enough there and it makes logical sense and it takes you from event A to event B, then I'm good. Make everything between the story points fun to play, and I'm happy. We have games like Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI that are talked about for having great storytelling, especially in the franchise. Like these games, they stand out head and shoulders above the other Final Fantasies. I don't get it. I played every game up until 15 and I just don't get it, but whatever. What about a game that I love? Oh, like Dark Souls. People once raved about the depth of its story, but where is it? In the lore? The lore that you have to learn about by taking time to read item descriptions and then piecing it together yourself? I made the mistake of arguing about Elden Ring with friends of mine. It's a fantastic game, certainly one of my favorites, but it has very unengaging storytelling. It's another game that requires you to dive deep and learn more about the world and its lore on your own. Maybe I'm guilty of conflating story with storytelling and story with plot. Maybe in Elden Ring's case, if I had to separate all 3 elements, I would say that it has a good story, a mediocre plot, and poor storytelling. Look, regardless, the game is a 9 out of 10 for me and something that I would recommend to anyone for the gameplay. What would I recommend for story, aside from the Witcher series? At the moment, not really much. But if you want to play a game that doesn't need a good story to be fun, how about something like Super Mario Sunshine? Really, this game just drops you off in a unique environment, and it's got great mechanics that carry you through. Again, there's little bits of storytelling that are largely unimportant, but they're just enough to take you from event A to event B. I can make that same case for so many different games in my collection. They don't need good, elaborate stories to be good games. But again, this is just my truncated opinion on a much larger discussion, so I'll leave it for another time, and we'll just move on for now. Replayability. Back in the 90s, I always thought that this was a strange category because I had a Nintendo 64. I didn't have a PC that I was playing games on. So what did replayability mean for Nintendo 64 games? Perfect Dark, for example. It's a great game, one of my favorites. But does that mean I'm going to just replay the levels on harder difficulties and try to achieve quicker completion times? Or what about Ocarina of Time? Was I supposed to just replay the game but do the dungeons in a different order? For a console like the Nintendo 64, I don't think developers went out of their way to try to make games replayable on subsequent playthroughs anyway. And so really to me it seemed like some arbitrary criterion that they just plucked out of thin air and they're just like, boom, there's replayability. What did it mean? What, was it just value, like bang for your buck in a game? Because if that was the case, a game like Majora's Mask has so much value in a single playthrough when you're trying to collect 100% of the items. Of course, when I got older, I finally started playing different games, finally started playing RPGs. I started to learn what replayability really meant, but more on RPGs later. For modern games, and especially multiplayer games, let's focus on those. I'm talking Dota 2, Rainbow Six Siege, all of those games that blanket the front page of any streaming site. You know the ones. I feel like replayability is correlated to the game receiving continued support after launch, so developer support. It's essential to have that ongoing developer support and to receive frequent updates, to maintain the healthy player base. The moment that the developers move on to a new project or announce something else in the works, like in the case of Overwatch, that game stagnates and it just dies. Post-launch updates for single-player games are taken for granted today. I didn't get to have those growing up when I was playing on cartridges with no internet connection. And I know that some games, some developers, they release their games and they're missing chunks of content. They're purposefully withheld, and then they're planned for future DLC. Sometimes the worst, the most egregious example is when a game releases and day one, there's paid content that you can buy. I hate that. On the other hand, I love it when games release, single-player games, and the developers keep an eye on those games, and they still release free updates. And those free updates have bug fixes, balancing, and sometimes free playable content. And, free playable content, replayability, maybe they're somewhat similar there. Now, let's get back to RPGs. These games, well, along with short arcade-style games, and, I don't want to leave shooters and beat-em-ups out of the conversation. These games also embody replayability. But RPGs specifically are the games that I didn't get to experience until I was older and had a gaming computer. Dark Souls, the Elder Scrolls, games with dozens of different weapons and spells. These can be played and replayed in so many different ways. Each build will make you experience something a little fresh and invite new challenges. Games like Mass Effect and Dragon Age, those can be replayed for their stories. And I know I didn't praise them earlier, but they do deserve this mention. They do deserve some mention for their stories. These games are designed with choices presented to the player at key points. And you can see the results of your different choices manifest in a variety of different ways. Your character may align with good or evil. You can decide who lives and who dies, and you can experience different endings to conclude the game. So not necessarily the best stories themselves, but the fact that there's so much flexibility in the stories and what you get to experience, that's incredible. And last but not least, games that deserve a mention for replayability are obviously all of your favorite, your loved games. These games, they don't necessarily have to have replayability in mind when the developers are making them. It's just that you love the experience that you had, you replay them once a year, every 5 years, every 10 years, whatever it is, your favorite games. I'll be talking about some of mine in a future video as well. So that's it for part 1 of this discussion. And believe me guys, over 2 months of waiting, I did not plan on doing a 2-part video. I wanted to have everything bundled up in one nice long video, but when I was writing the script, it got way too long, and I just thought that 2 parts would be easier to manage. So here it is. In this video, we talked about, obviously, the graphics, the sound and music, the story, and the replayability. So what does that leave for next time? Gameplay. There's a lot to talk about for gameplay, trust me. I can't believe I didn't have Leo in the video up until now. He's been sleeping the whole time. Anyways, stay tuned for the next video. The rough draft is already complete. I just need to clean it up a little bit. And I promise you, you won't have to wait as long for the next part. Thank you to everybody who's returning to the channel, who's been patiently waiting. I had fun interacting with some of you guys in the comments of previous videos. Thank you to any new watchers. Any new watchers who are just finding my channel for the first time. We will see all of you in the next video.